After the initial shock wore off, the room descended into chaos. Some of the parents went to go pound on the door again. Officer Martinez was shouting over the din, trying to restore order. Stacy and Heather were the only ones who remained calm, at least on the outside. Stacy couldn't look at the picture anymore. She turned away, her hand going to her mouth. That's when Heather tugged at her sleeve. "Hey, Stacy, something's changed," Heather said. "What?" Stacy said, turning around and looking back at the picture with reluctance. Had it really changed? Then she looked again and gasped. Jason was gone. "Stacy," Heather said, having gone pale. She was pointing a shaking finger at the monster, or rather, what was in the monster's mouth. Stacy screamed when she saw it wasn't Ryan in the mouth of the monster anymore. It was Jason being eaten. The scream brought everyone back to their senses. Heather made a big deal of gathering everyone around the book again. Once they all saw, they gazed at Stacy with sympathy in their eyes. There was fear there also, the fear that their kids would soon be the next victims. "What do we do?" Alicia said. Stacy shook her head. She couldn't think straight. All she could think of was her son. He could be dead for all she knew. Her heart was plummeting. Her husband was on the way back from work, but it was already too late. She had failed Jason. "Everyone, please stay calm," Julio said. He looked at the journal. "Everything here may not be as it seems." Everyone looked at him, waiting for him to go on. "We were given this journal for a reason. We need to read it," Heather recoiled. "The thought of touching that thing," she said, unable to finish her sentence. Julio grabbed the book. "We don't have time to fall prey to fear. They need our help," he said. He stood apart from the group, all looking apprehensive as he turned the page. There was writing, but no date. Julio began to read out loud. It wasn't long until everyone in the room was pressing closer to listen better. The unfolding words of the journal carried little comfort for the parents of the lost children. Instead, they only felt their already insurmountable horror grow. "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, then may God have mercy on your souls, for the very creatures of hell now infest your shadows. A final word of warning. You must not read this journal outside a dedicated sanctuary. If you do, the moving house will find you. He will find you. From him, none can escape. Apologies in advance for what happens next. You will find that this journal is not like others. The words here are not of the traditional kind. They exist not in ink, but in memory. Seeing is believing, after all. There is no telling. You will be shown. You will be shown everything from the beginning." Before anyone could remark on the strange introduction to the journal, the room around them vanished, and in the next instant, they all appeared somewhere else. A completely different place and a completely different time. Stacy gasped, hardly believing her eyes. They were all sitting on benches, arranged in a circle around a campfire. The woods beyond the light of the flames were dark and ominous. Above them, through the thick canopy, Stacy could make out the clear sky, alight with numberless stars. She shivered and brought her arms around her chest. The air was cold. Heather was next to her, as well as Alicia. Julio was across from them, and the rest were spread around. Their eyes were all wide with fear and uncertainty. Their necks craned to peer through the shadows, but they were unable to penetrate the darkness beyond the light of the fire. Julio made to stand, then grunted as he found that he could not leave the bench. "What is this?" he said. "I can't move." The others tried getting up, each one finding the same result. They were all trapped where they sat. Panic began to sweep through the group. Stacy was about to say something when a sound in the woods made them all pause. It was somewhat faint at first, but unmistakable. Something heavy was trudging through the underbrush. It was coming towards them. Through the gaps in the trees, Stacy saw something moving. It was slow, lumbering, yet the inexorable noise of its approach belied an overwhelming strength. Her heart hammered in her chest. Beside her, her friends and companions all shook like leaves, unable to speak through their fear. Julio appeared to forget that he still had his gun in his holster. Stacy had the crazy thought that if he tried to fire it, it would fail. The size of the shape increased with every step towards their encampment. Stacy felt naked without walls, roof, and windows to peer through. She would have felt safer with something between her and it, though she doubted that this creature could be stopped by ordinary means. It came near to the edge of the trees, and as it did, two pale lights appeared high above the ground on its frame. It created a haunting glow around itself and revealed a clearer silhouette. It was huge, wide, and tall. The shape was sort of like a man, but the proportions of the limbs, head, and joints were inhuman. It watched them for a long time, now very still. It was as if it was waiting for something. Stacy did not like the light coming from its eyes. They were even more threatening than a wild animal's. More disturbing was the intelligence that seemed to be there. It was seeing them, and it knew them for what they were, namely, human beings. Stacy was sure that it thought of them all as prey. None of them noticed the man who appeared in their midst until he spoke, his voice commanding, yet soft. "Do not be afraid," he said. There were a few screams. People tried to jump out of their seats, but they only pulled their muscles. A woman covered her face and started to cry. Stacy couldn't remember her name. Her husband comforted her. Stacy wished her own was with her. He must be wondering where she was after calling him in such distress. "Who are you?" Julio said, trying to sound authoritative. "I began the journal." The man said. Stacy peered at the man. It was the strangest thing. Every time she blinked or thought she could describe what he looked like, small details about him seemed to change. Beard, no beard, red hair, black hair, tall, short, fat, skinny. The man went through 100 transformations right before her very eyes. Eventually, Stacy could not bear it any longer and had to look slightly away. She noticed that everyone else must have experienced the same thing because they were all avoiding looking at him directly. "What are you trying to show us?" Stacy said, once she was more or less reoriented. "The moving house," the man said. "What we know of it so far." "Who is we?" Alicia said. "The Hart family, of course," the man said. "The keepers of the moving house. The fact that you are all here means that the family has failed, and it has become unmoored from its seal." "Our children are missing," Heather said. "Please, help us get them back." The man was silent for a long time. Eventually he shook his head. His next words sent chills down all their spines and knives of ice through their hearts. "It is too late. The house has made its claim on them," he said. For the first time since this whole ordeal started, there was true anger from the group. Their fears were temporarily pushed aside as they expressed their rage at the notion that all hope was lost. "What did you bring us here for, then?" a man said, spittle flying from his mouth. "We need answers. The book has to have something that can help us," a woman cried, tears shining on her cheeks. Everyone else made similar supplications and demands. The man remained calm, almost impassive, except for a ghost of sorrow on his face. Stacy thought she understood. This man must have suffered what they are suffering now. He knew something, if it is too late for our children. Stacy said, causing everyone to enter a shocked, horrified silence. They gawked at her. "Then what do we do now, so it doesn't ever happen again?" "What are you saying?" Heather said, grabbing Stacy by the wrist. "Don't give up hope so easily," Julio said. Just listen, Stacy said, her voice exploding into the night. The others recoiled at the vehemence in her tone. We don't have time to argue. We need to find a way to stop this thing. Whatever has happened, we can't change that. We need to know what to do moving forward. Maybe we can find a way to save them. Maybe he's wrong, and it isn't too late. First, though, we need to know everything before we act. She turned her gaze to the man, looking at him full on again, though it pained her to do so. Her face was grave. Tell us what to do. The man nodded. Stacy finally couldn't stand it anymore and looked away with a gasp, her head spinning from the strange metamorphosis the man continuously underwent. He looked around the group and his eyes became worried. I sense no heart blood here. Where are my last descendants? He said. Everyone looked around, as if expecting Henry or Megan to suddenly appear among them. They remained absent. Your last descendants are Henry and his daughter, Megan. He died in a fire, Stacy said, then paused, tightening her hands into fists. We think the house has his daughter. The house has been after our blood ever since we destroyed my brother, the man said. This is the worst possible outcome. Your brother? Julio said. You mean that whoever is doing this is because of a family feud? In the year 1716, my brother's family died, the man said. Everyone leaned closer, eager to listen as the man began to unfold the tale for them. At least, that is what he led us to believe. It wasn't until after the night of the fire that we realized he had done something terrible. He committed a sin against God and in doing so, cursed our whole lineage. My brother was a pious man, yet his piety would even make the most zealous Bible thumper cry with horror at his wild rantings. He believed in a back door to heaven. He obsessed over it. To be honest, no one knew where such an idea came to him, though the answer, I think, is in the origin of the moving house. My brother became increasingly vile-tempered. At first, we thought it was because of the loss of his family, yet he hardly ever mentioned them or spoke of them with any degree of sorrowful feeling. He only spoke of the door, relating a strange gospel none of us were familiar with. He raged about how the rest of the town were damned blasphemers and that we were all going to be swallowed by the moving house, while he alone would ascend to heaven to be where he belonged. The town, not to mention the rest of the family, tolerated him and his terrible behavior. Then, one day, he did something that went too far. That day, we no longer found him only repulsive, but also dangerous. The day of my wedding was when everything changed. My brother never attended. This was much of a relief to everyone there. Yet when we found out the reason for his absence, all sense of relief fled from us. My brother set fire to the gifts my wife and I were to receive. They had been stored in my parents' house. When we noticed the smoke afar off, it was too late. The flames had already destroyed everything. For me and the rest of my siblings, it was the final straw. We could not ignore or forgive my brother any longer. The town had felt that way for a long time, and when our blood finally boiled over, they were all too willing to give themselves to righteous fury. My siblings, my friends, neighbors, and then the whole town assembled. My brother had been easy to locate. He was back in his house, cackling to himself like a madman. When we questioned him, he easily and openly admitted to his foul deed. Even more, he gloated over it with mad glee. Our town became a mob. And it is by some miracle that my parents were able to turn us all away and have everyone go back to their homes to return to this matter with cooler heads. It might have worked. We may have been able to come up with a solution. Banishment, at best, but hanging most likely. Such were the feelings of the town at the time. Mine own heart was also seized by a murderous rage I thought myself incapable of. Yet the passing of hours and the soft words of my parents and wife had the desired affect and cooled the flames somewhat. The insane rage almost passed. Yet when I was clearing the ruin of my parents' house, for there was still a danger that the embers and burning ashes could catch our crop fields aflame, I saw something that turned my heart from blazing red to pitch black. Uncovering the wreckage, I found the skeletons of the gifts that me, my wife, and someday our child would never enjoy. It was a tragic sight, yet now that my vision was not as red-bathed, I knew that these things could be replaced. That's when I found the doll. I noticed something strange as I discovered it under debris. It wasn't like the rest of the things, which were simply burned where they had sat before the fire was set. First, it was not with the other gifts, which were in the next room. The doll, I became aware, had been moved here prior to the fire, and no one admitted to moving it. It had to be my brother. I studied the doll, and upon close inspection, I noticed a tear along the area of the neck and shoulders. When I picked it up using a cloth so as not to burn myself, I let out a scream. The head was detached, though I knew that was too light a term. It had been beheaded. I threw the doll down, and it landed with its back up. The head stared at me with glassy eyes and a small, innocent smile. For some reason, that smile was now forever tainted. It seemed mocking and evil. On the back of the doll, something had been scrawled. I picked it up again and read the inscription. "Rejoice, sinner. The moving house claims your firstborn child, and your wife and your family and this town. For your new God." Something inside me became unmoored. When I spread word and showed the town what my brother had done, even the kindest heart could no longer make supplication on behalf of the villain. We all became convinced that he had sold his soul to some devil, and in that heated moment, the mob reformed. Upon the edge of the sunset, the town's main families met for the last time to discuss the matter. It was to be murder. None said nay, and all hearts were set to the task. The Collins, Miller, Richards, and Hart families were the main lineages in town. We took up an oath of vengeance. We had this vow sanctified by our resident pastor and priest. If only we knew that the dealings of the devil can so often mirror the justice of God. Before the time came to complete the terrible business, I and my siblings gathered in secret. Together, we voiced something truly terrible. My youngest sister was not of the faith and had given herself to more pagan leanings. Usually, we paid her eccentricities little mind, but that night, she promised us that her magic would serve only to increase the aim of our vengeance. A combination of God's holy wrath and an unholy curse to ensure the eternal torment of our own brother. With all the parts set, we put our plan in motion. By the time the march started, darkness had just settled over the land. Our torches made our shadows long, and more than once I thought I saw shapes in those shadows that were not human. At the end, we at last came to the house and made our intentions known. Our brother, who had every chance to try and escape, as our approach was not hidden from him, only crowed with maniacal laughter as we blocked him in from every side. If only I had listened to my sense of unease at that moment, I would have seen that we were all playing right into my brother's corrupted hands. His evil machinations were coming to their forbidden fruit. I asked him at last if he had any words to say in his defense, or any desire to cry repentance. He continued to bray at us, sounding wilder and more animal than man. Something in his eyes at that moment gave me extreme pause. They were mad, of course, yet there was something else in them as well. Something behind them that I thought was moving. I don't actually know who first threw their torch through the window. It was sent crashing into the room, landing at my brother's feet. He must have felt the heat, yet he continued to scream with laughter with no sign of discomfort whatsoever. When we discussed it later, no one confessed to having thrown it. This left me to wonder just how deeply the moving house had us under its unholy spell, and for how long. Regardless, once the first torch was thrown, the sight called the rest of us to action. We all threw our torches into the house. The flames quickly spread. They engulfed my brother and everything around him, yet his maddened laughter never became screams of pain. It was in that moment that the feeling of unease that had grown inside me flourished into naked terror. I knew then that this was what he wanted all along. That is when the shadow appeared. It gathered itself from the smoke and gained a writhing, mangled shape. My brother fell to his knees before it in worship. He moved his lips without sound, even as his skin peeled and cracked, blackening to his very bones. Then the shadow touched my brother on the forehead with its finger. It disappeared, and my brother at last burned until there was nothing left but ashes. The man ceased to speak, and for a long moment, the group pondered the story in silence. Stacy was in complete shock that this could truly be their town's history. That it could be history at all was almost beyond belief, yet her heart told her that it was true. This had happened, and now the consequences of that terrible day were finally coming back to haunt the town in the worst way. It had their children. What was it that your brother accomplished exactly? Stacy said. He opened the door to a place forbidden by God, the man said. Even before the dark ritual, the Indians we encountered avoided this land. They spoke of a great evil that haunted the hidden world. We did not listen. We did not understand. All of us, that is, except my brother. Instead of being fearful of the evil, he embraced it, and slowly, it drove him insane. There is an eternal truth that ancient peoples understood, one we should have heeded. As above, so below. In the Holy Scriptures we read of many mansions in our Father's house. God has prepared many rooms for the faithful. Does it not follow that the great deceiver and mimicker of God also has places prepared for lost souls? Those words brought a single, terrible conclusion to Stacy's mind. Are you saying that the moving house is the house of the devil? She said. The man nodded. It is his prepared place where mortals become abominations. They shed their humanity and forsake their souls in order to gain what only the devil can offer. In other words, cursed power. Long ago, men knew well the beings in the moving house. They are the watchers spoken of in the apocryphal writings. Angels? Alicia said, incredulous. Can it really be? Yes, dark angels fallen from grace, the man said. Their power is very real, and they speak to each of us from the dark corners of our hearts, seeking to twist our goodwill and sense of righteousness to evil. We need to know how to close the door and get our children back, Stacy said. Please, how do we invoke the power of heaven to help us? The door can only be opened by one who is seeking, the man said. But the children were not seeking, Julio said. At least they didn't know the moving house existed. In fact, until now, none of us did. Then, it must be that one of you set these events in motion, the man said, pointing an accusing finger at all of them. Everyone's eyes went wide. They looked at each other, even at their own spouses. Could it really be that someone would do something this evil to their own kin? Find the one who knows of the moving house, and you will find the one who opened the door. Discover the pact they have made. With the symbol I have written on the cover of this journal, you will be given power to undo the covenant, if it is not too late, the man said. The man's visage began to waver, like a mirage of the heat. Stacy felt that this vision was coming to an end. She looked at her friends, and for the first time, she searched their frightened gazes, trying to uncover some hidden intention. "Did you do this, Heather? Have you only pretended to be my friend, Alicia?" Dread clasped itself over Stacy's heart as she saw her friends staring back at her, the same searching quality in their expressions. Julio looked around, his hand back on his gun. The man disappeared, and the vision began to collapse in an insane mesh of colors. A creaking sound filled Stacy's ears. She clasped her hands to them and screamed as a million rusty hinges sang directly into her mind. The last thing she saw was the thing in the woods, finally coming out of the shadows. Its head was elongated and grotesque, and she recognized it immediately. It was the monster from the book. It opened its mouth, revealing rows and rows of chattering teeth. From inside its mouth, the leech tongue revealed itself. Stacy's screams blended with everyone else's. Then, in a blink, the vision was gone, and they were back in the sealed room. For one terrible moment, everyone was still. Then Julio pulled out his gun, setting off absolute pandemonium.